Previously in this course, we've discussed how recursive queries and iterative queries from one DNS server to other DNS servers can be used to walk the DNS tree, with the hopes of giving the answer for a DNS request back to the client who originally asked for it. And a big part of that working is that the root servers know the top-level domain servers, and the top-level domain servers know the authoritative name servers for the various organizations that manage those zones. And I'll add on to our list right here, Nugget Lab. So currently we have two authoritative name servers in our lab environment. We have DC-Nug and Server2-Nug, with DC-Nug having the primary copies and Server2 having the secondaries. And for the sake of our discussion, I would like you to imagine that we have a development group, and the development group has a whole bunch of additional IP addresses and hosts that they want to manage and keep track of, including the DNS portion of that. So they ask us, hey, can we just make a DNS server and be dev.nuggetlab.com? And they could make a separate zone out of just that. They could put it on their server and then have their name server records and their A records and quad A records and mail exchange records, etc. as part of their zone. And regarding that, the answer is yes, we could absolutely allow them to do that. But we also need to take an additional step and make sure that we tell the name server or servers in charge of nuggetlab.com who the name server is that's in charge of this subdomain of dev.nuggetlab.com. I put nuggetlam. There we go, nuggetlab.com. And the process of training our DNS servers that are holding the copy of nuggetlab.com, that zone, that there is a subdomain and pointing to the name server for that subdomain is referred to as DNS delegation. And it's done with two basic steps. Number one, we'd go ahead and create the subdomain zone wherever we want to put it. And then secondly, we'd go to the parent zone, in this case, nuggetlab.com, and simply right-click and say, I want to set up a delegation and tell it where the new name server is for that subdomain. Ta-da! That's it. And that's what we're going to demonstrate right now in the lab. So we're going to log on to our Windows 10 client. We'll supply the lab password and click on the right arrow to log on. We'll bring up the DNS manager in whatever way you'd like to do that. You click on the Windows icon and just type in dnsmgmt.msc and press enter. And here we have our two DNS servers, DC-Nug and also Server2-Nug. So let's create a primary zone for the subdomain of dev.nuggetlab.com, and we'll do that on Server 2. And to do that, we'll go ahead and we will click on the forward lookup zones underneath Server 2, because that's where we're going to create this primary zone for the dev.nuggetlab.com, and we'll right-click on forward lookup zones, and from the drop-down, select New Zone. We'll click Next to start the wizard. We'll specify that this is a primary zone. We'll click on Next to continue. And we'll go ahead and name this dev.nuggetlab.com and click on Next to continue. It'll create a new file with the name dev.nuggetlab.com.dns. That'll be great. That's kept in the system root directory under system32 in the DNS folder. And we'll click Next to continue. We'll accept the default of do not allow dynamic updates because this is not in Active Directory and it wouldn't be secure. So that's fine. We'll click on Next. And then we'll click on Finish. So we look at the details of it by selecting dev.nuggetlab.com. We've got our start of authority record. It's listing itself as the name server, and we also have a name server record for Server 2. While we're here, let's create a record inside of this zone. And to do that, we can right-click over here on the right-hand side, and from the drop-down list, let's go ahead and create a new A record. Let's create SRv6, and for the IP address, we'll use 192.168.1.6. And because we do not have a writable reverse lookup zone on Server 2, we'll bypass creating an associated pointer record at the moment. And we'll click on Add Host to add that host. We have a success message. We'll click OK to dismiss that, and then we'll click on Done. So there's our host record right there. Now, if we were to bring up a command prompt here on our Windows 10 client, let's go ahead and do that. I'll click on the Windows icon in the bottom left-hand corner. We'll just type in CMD and press Enter to bring up a command prompt. And let me move it over just a little bit so we can see everything. From here, if I do an ipconfig /all, just want to verify what the DNS server is we're using. That's this bad boy right here. So our IP address is .120, our default gateway is .1, and we're using the DNS server at 192.168.1.100, which is DC-Nug. Great. Now the problem with good old DC-Nug is that DC-Nug does not have in its zone files that subdomain for dev.nuggetlab.com. It doesn't exist on it. And at the moment, DC-nug doesn't even know who to ask for to get that information for a subdomain, because a delegation does not exist yet down to server 2 for that subdomain. So here on the client, if we did a CLS to clear the screen, because we're using the DC-nug server as our DNS server, if we did the command nslookup, looking for the host srv6.dev.nuggetlab.com and pressed enter, it's going to come up empty because our DNS server doesn't know how to resolve that for us. It's got the nuggetlab.com domain, but not the subdomain information. To solve that, we can go to our forward lookup zones here on DCNug and select nuggetlab.com and simply right-click on nuggetlab.com, and from the drop-down, we're going to select New Delegation. So we'll select New Delegation. We'll click on Next to continue the wizard. The domain that we're delegating is dev. It automatically fills in the parent portion of nuggetlab.com for us. We'll go ahead and click on Next to continue. And now it wants to know, okay, who is the name server that I can reach out to or refer to if I need to look up records from dev.nuggetlab.com. So what we'll do here is we'll click on Add, and we'll add the name server for server 2, which is srv2-nug.nuggetlab.com. We'll click on Resolve. That resolves to the host.102. That's server 2's IP address. And we'll click on OK to continue. And then we'll click on Next. And then we'll click on Finish to finish the delegation wizard. So what that did for us, if you'll notice here, it created under nuggetlab.com, it created this little delegation for dev. So when this name server, DCNug, gets a request for something in dev.nuggetlab.com, it knows about the name server, SRV2, and it can resolve SRV2 into an IP address because there's also an A record for that. We can verify that just by taking a look at nuggetlab.com. Here's the A record for server 2. So that way DC-nug knows who to go to ask for help in resolving a name in dev.nuggetlab.com. So if we go back to our command prompt on the Windows 10 client, it failed a moment ago before we had the delegation. Now that we have the delegation in place, if we hit the up arrow key and press enter, now it's showing us the resolution for srv6.dev.nuggetlab.com to this IP address. It also specifies that this answer is non-authoritative because our server, this guy right here that we're making the query to, DC-nug, is not the authoritative server for the subdomain. Server 2 is. So now, my friend, that we've had the opportunity to set up the delegation in the video, it is now your turn. Go ahead and launch the hands-on lab and practice setting up a delegation, doing those steps that we followed in this nugget. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.